Dear colleagues, I am very thankful and glad to have the opportunity to share with you my considerations about two neglected in some way mosaics dating back to the 2nd, 3rd century AD, which have been discovered in the Roman provinces of Thracia and Mysia Inferior in the territory of present-day Bulgaria. That of Alcestis, found in Augusta Traiana, present-day Stara Zagora, and that of Cypressus, found in Escus. The first mosaic was discovered during rescue excavations in Stara Zagora in 1986, 100 meters east of the fortress wall of Augusta Traiana, in a building with a long axis oriented east-west. It has not been preserved and is known only from the drawings of the discoverer Krasimir Kalchev, who doesn't give exact dimensions and descriptions of the colors of the tesserae. The mosaic floor inside the building has an area of 20 square meters and is executed in opus tessellatum and in opus sectile. Only the right part and the upper right corner of the frame are completely preserved. It consists of 3 borders, of which the outer is monochromatic, filled with white tesserae, while the middle is decorated with the reining wave and the inner with meanders. In the outer border, there are 3 inscriptions. 2 are located at the outer edge of its upper side, these ones, and the 3rd one is on the right, adjacent to the middle border. The inscription on the right, Alcestis, is written with beautifully outlined and proportionate letters closer to the end of the border and parallel to its right side. The sigma is lunar. This is a label inscription, and it apparently denotes one of the characters depicted in the inner unpreserved panel of the mosaic floor. It is logical to assume that the name of another mythological character, most likely Admetus, was symmetrically written on the left missing side of the border. 2 other inscriptions containing proper names are read at the top of the border. The distance at which they stand apart, if the principle of symmetry has been observed, presupposes the presence of other unsaved inscriptions along the border on the left. The letters are visibly smaller than those of the first inscription. They are not the same size and are not aligned. The awkwardness of the ductus suggests that they were improvised on the spot and added to the existing model of Alcestis mythological plot. Their purpose was obviously to indicate the names of persons who had any portraits or busts probably placed in special niches here. The right inscription is 2-lined and contains the name of the high priestess Sabina, Sabina Archiereia. The first 3 letters of Sabina's name are larger than the others, and her title of the 2nd line is written in much smaller letters, the sigma and epsilon being again lunar. The long iota in the proper name is written with the characteristic post-classical Greek substitution of E with A digraph, which had the same pronunciation. Sabina is a trivial name in Roman anthroponymy, which occurs in lapidary epigraphic monuments of Augusta Traiana. Priestesses of the imperial cult in the city are not rare as well. At least 6 other notable women are known to have performed duties maintaining the imperial cult in the city. To the left of Sabina's inscription, 4 letters at the end of another anthroponym written on 1 line are partly preserved. Only the last 2 of them are certainly read at sigma. As for the previous two, no more than their lower part is visible. If their lines are rendered correctly by Kalchev, then the second letter may be mu or kappa lambda, endings mass or class respectively, while the restoration of the first one is problematic. It resembles phi or psi, but there is no such letter combination at the end of a Greek name. Both the presence of a high priestess in the inscription and stylistic features of the mosaic eloquently support a dating at the end of the 2nd and the beginning of the 3rd century AD. Given the name of Alcestis, the location of the inscription and the known iconographic models in antiquity, the plot of the mosaic in the inner unsaved panel could most likely represent Heracles and Alcestis or Admetus and Alcestis. The first plot, the return from Hades, represents Heracles bringing Alcestis out of the underworld, a scene symbolizing the triumph over death. Such is the multi-figured composition from a tomb in the necropolis of the Holy Island between Porto and Ostia near Rome, which depicts Heracles with a crook and the veiled Alcestis. She comes out of the kingdom of Hades and stands before two male figures, one of whom is apparently Admetus. A similar scene, but with a different iconography, Heracles with the lion skin and Alcestis to his left here, stand in front of the seated Admetus, is also known from the catacombs of Via Latina. The other well-known iconographic motif represents the figure of Admetus and Alcestis, either their wedding or the farewell of the spouses at the descent of Alcestis in Hades. The motif, the wedding of Admetus, is widespread in ancient mosaic practice and decorates the triclinia of rich Roman houses, such as the triclinium in Nîmes in Gallia Narbonensis. It is a suitable candidate for the central panel in this case, as the narrative suggests two figures. The farewell of the spouses, on the other hand, has been a popular motif in vase painting since the classical period, as evidenced by the Etruscan red figure crater from Vulci, 4th century BC. Both scenes, the wedding and the death, symbolize the emotional experience of the married couple and the marital devotion. The choice between them is hampered by the lack of a reliable interpretation of the function of the room here. Nevertheless, the chosen mythological plot presupposes the involvement of the provincial elite of Augusta Traiana in the contemporary visual culture, in which Alcestis was a symbol of family commitment and sacrifice. The expressive power of mythology, transformed into a kind of cultural language for communication in the first centuries of the Roman Empire, was used here to immortalize love and affection in the family on the high priestess Sabina in Augusta Traiana. As for the second mosaic, that of Cypressus, it was discovered in a large building dating back to the time of Septimius Severus during rescue excavations led by Teofil Ivanov in 1956, 25 meters north of the northern fortress wall of Escus II. The floor of the room, which was not entirely excavated, is 18 square meters and is covered with multicolored mosaic. An octagonal panel on a white background shows the metamorphosis of Cypressus. The composition consists of the figure of Cypressus himself turning into a tree on the left, here, Artemis on the right, here, and a lower tree next to her in the right corner of the panel, here. The deer pierced by an arrow is depicted at the feet of Cypressus. The mosaic is placed directly on the compacted soil. The tesserae in the background and in the figures do not differ in size, but vary between 8 to 10 millimeters and are in 7 colors: black, white, pink, brick red, yellow, light green, and blue. Artemis is represented in 3/4 profile in a rapid movement to the left. She steps on terrain hinted at by a line of black tesserae in 2 rows. The weight of her body falls on her right leg, as you can see here, which is slightly bent at the knee and brought forward, while her left leg is stretched back. The goddess is clad in black leather embades in Greek, low calf-length boots with a typical outward-facing lapel, decorated here without fringe or decoration. The left hand with which the goddess holds the bow is visible between its upper curve and the bowstring here. The hand is bent at the elbow and its inner contour is more clearly delineated with reddish tesserae. Artemis' big bow with strongly bent shoulders is depicted with the same tile red tesserae. One of its twisted ends, the so-called corone here, through which the tendon neure was pierced through a special ear to stretch, reaches her left knee below here, and the other protrudes above her left shoulder here. The bowstring is depicted with yellow tesserae here, well traceable at both ends of the bow, but covered at the waist by the folds of the chiton fastened under her breasts here. The quiver represented by black tesserae is visible behind the right shoulder of the figure here. The usual iconography of Artemis Agrotera shows the goddess reaching for it with her right hand to draw an arrow and looking in the direction of the upcoming shooting, while here she is turned to the right and her right hand is outstretched, as you can see. Teofil Ivanov, the discoverer and the first publisher of the mosaic, believes that the goddess keeps with her right hand the spear visible in front of her here. However, after a closer look, the viewer notices that there is no trace of Artemis' handle on it, and that the spear actually passes in front of her hand to rest in the curve of Cypressus' left hand here. Artemis is wearing a white sleeveless chiton that reaches to her knees and allows free movement of the leg. The chiton is belted below the chest with a narrow belt under which the upward fold of the chiton, apoptygma, falls down in the waist. A wrap slung over the right shoulder behind the figure's back and transferred to her left arm behind the bow flutters to the goddess' right. Here. The details of Artemis' face are difficult to detect, partly due to the large size of the tesserae used. The right cheekbone of her face, however, is well outlined, Black tesserae allude to the eyes, nose, and mouth. The hair is parted on the left and fastened at the tape and the nape of the neck here. The young man changing into a cypress is depicted in profile to the left, behind the ear hit by the arrow. Only the right part of his body is preserved. You can see the curve from the arm and waist to the thigh, represented by black tesserae here. Beneath it, the right leg, outlined with 2 rows of reddish tesserae, is slightly bent at the knee and brought forward here. With his right hand bent at the elbow, the young man touches the crown sprouting from his head. The trunk of the emerging tree is represented by vertical lines of tile red and black tesserae here, and the body is hinted at by pale red tesserae here. Rare ancient visualizations of Cypressus myth predominantly depict the animal shot with an arrow. Cypressus is depicted with a bow in his hand directed against a deer in the mosaic from Leicester, dating back to the 4th century AD, for example, and the fresco from the Villa of the Veti in Pompeii depicts him with a spear in his right hand, seated next to an arrow-pierced deer. The most important specification of the mosaic in question is the absence of Apollo, the other character in the traditional myth of Cypressus, and his replacement here with Artemis, Diana. Overwhelmed by the death of his beloved animal, Cypressus, as we know, begs Apollo to turn him into a cypress, as the constantly flowing drops of resin on the trunk of this tree are likened to his inexhaustible tears of sorrow for the deer. The unusual replacement of Apollo with Artemis Diana could be interpreted in several ways: mythographic, iconographic, and sociocultural one. In terms of the mythological plot, the replacement of Apollo with Artemis is logically explained by the kinship between them as brother and sister, and by the traditional idea of Artemis as a hunter wandering in forests and mountains, a landscape against which the metamorphosis of Cypressus takes place. In addition, the deer is a sacred animal of Artemis, and although the traditional version of the myth presents the deer unrelated to her, a connection between Cypressus and Artemis deer could be expected. It is possible ever to look for a parallel version of the myth in the mosaic of Escus, that Cypressus has killed Artemis' sacred animal by accident, and that she runs in horror to the scene. As for iconography, such an image of Artemis the hunter is almost non-existent. When not in a static position, she is traditionally presented either in a move to the left, shooting with a bow, or with a bow in the left hand, while the right hand raises to the quiver on the back. There is a striking parallel with this pose of Artemis, but in profile to the opposite left side and with the right hand outstretched in another metamorphosis mosaic depicting Apollo and Daphne from Antioch. The unusual composition of the mosaic is complemented by its epigraphic characteristics. Although there are 2 figures, there is only one preserved inscription in Latin to the left of the figure of Cypressus. Diana's name, if it was written at all, can be assumed to have been read in the unsaved part of the mosaic, either above her head or at the bottom left between the 2 figures. The inscription in in two lines is a type of label announcing the name of the depicted character, Cypressus. The letters with a height of 5 centimeters on both lines are well aligned. More space is left in the first line after the first letter C and before the last letter E, so that the three middle letters VPR occupy a central place, below which the other three letters of the name SVS are symmetrically placed on the second line. Apparently, the letters in the white background created a difficulty for the mosaicist, as can be judged from the way in which he surrounded the black tesserae of the letters with the white tesserae in the background, especially here. The inscription reveals a certain illiteracy and clumsiness. In the High Latin literature, the transliteration from the ancient Greek Kyparissos is used for the personification of the cypress, and the Latinized loanword Cupressus is used for the name of the tree. In the mosaic of Escus, however, the name of the tree, not that of the young man, is written with a simplified geminate. 2S into 1S. As for the socio-cultural context of our mosaic, the choice of such a hybrid iconography of Cypressus with Artemis and not with Apollo deprives the composition of its homoerotic message and is indicative of the predominant tastes in Ulpia Escus. The presentation of this version of the myth proved to be more appropriate to the atmosphere of a Roman colony, the establishment of which was linked to the settlement of Roman legionaries and veterans. The unusual combination of Cypressus with Artemis is indicative also of the manner of the mosaicist's work and the opportunity of combining different parts and personages of different patterns in accordance with the tastes of the commissionaries. I'm finished. Thank you for your attention.